This is the Buried in Work podcast, where we share tips and interview experts to help you simplify estate planning and end-of-life tasks.
I'm your host, Adam Zuckerman, and today we have a very special guest, Jeanette Yates. She is a self-care coach for caregivers and the founder of the Self Caregiver. She's dedicated to helping caregivers cultivate self-care practices that make them feel good, not guilty, which is very important. Now, she's walked the walk as a lifetime caregiver. She's here to share her insights on how to avoid burnout, which is something we all need to get our heads wrapped around, setting boundaries and prioritizing self-care, even when it feels impossible. With that, welcome, Jeanette.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
It's glad that you're here today. Okay, we've got a lot to hop into.
Yeah.
How did you get started? This is a really niche industry that is so unbelievably important, and the reality is a lot of people just don't focus on it.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I have been a caregiver for my mom since she was diagnosed with her first of many illnesses when I was 8 years old. And of course, caregiving when you're 8, it's not, you don't know it's caregiving. Nobody calls it that. It's just you're helping mommy. And then of course, it's taken many iterations over the last 4 decades. I'm now 49, still taking care of my mom. But starting probably 2009, she, had a cancer situation that caused a lot of, as I know you're very familiar with, cancer doesn't just do its one thing with the one area, it messes up everything. And so that really caused her neuromuscular disease to have some issues. And then since then, it's been a slow decline. 2014 to now has been faster decline. And so my caregiving role kind of has ramped up since that 2009 to 2014, all the way to 2024. And one of the things that happened was I was doing all the things. I mean, I used to be a Pilates instructor. I was an avid runner. I, had a prayer journal and a gratitude journal and a morning routine and all the things. And I was still coming to the end of every day, like feeling like I wanted to die. Like I really was just like, I can't do this. And meanwhile, I'm married and have 2 children. So like during all that time, I'm raising young children and all of that. And so I was like, well, I'm doing self-care. That's what they tell you to do. Like take care of yourself so you can take care of others. Well, I was doing that and it wasn't working. So what I learned was that no self-care will work if you don't feel like you deserve it and you aren't actually able to be present in the moment of it. So like, for example, you can do all the yoga that you want to do, but if your brain is thinking about all the stuff you haven't done or need to do, then you're not really doing yoga. If you are constantly feeling like you have to earn time for yourself instead of just take time for yourself, that's another problem. And so the way that I finally ended up getting out of the cycle of burnout was addressing some of those deeper rooted needs. And so now that's what I do is I help caregivers do that, because a lot of times caregivers, if you tell them to take care of themselves first, they might punch you in the face because they're so tired of hearing it. They already know it, but they're still not able to do it. And that's where I step in and say, okay, let's look at your situation and let's figure out ways that you can get the support you need so you can take the time you need.
How do people recognize, and how do you help people recognize that they even are a caregiver? For myself, when my dad passed away, I stepped in, I helped my mom organize her estate. When she has questions about things, she comes to me. And of course, when I can, which is as much as I can, I want to help out. But I don't necessarily consider myself a caregiver per se, because caregiver in my head was always a medical type role. Now,
right.
After reading a little bit more, after getting more familiar, caregiving is not just medical. It's helping pay bills. It's helping get organized. It's fixing things around the house. It's making sure that somebody's life is organized. But that took a while for me to understand. Is that unique, or is that something that a lot of people struggle with?
Well, I think that is one of the problems, is depending on where you grew up in the country, what the language of of your community is. Caregiver may be like a professional role, like you hire a caregiver to come in, but you're the son or daughter, right? In other areas, caregiver is more of something that, children feel like they are doing. One of the things so a lot of times I'll say I help women caring for their aging parents, because that sounds more like, oh yeah, I care for my aging parents. I help them out. It doesn't have that, that heavy mantle of caregiver. It doesn't sound so intimidating. But one of the things, I think it is normal to think, I'm just doing the things a daughter or son would do. That's just being a son or daughter. You think you're doing that like, oh yeah, I'll pick up some groceries for you, drop it off, no problem. I'll swing by and get that prescription for you, no problem. We all do that. We do that for our friends, right? We do that for our children. We do that doesn't feel caregiver-y. But what happens is, this is where we wake up one day and we say, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm drowning. And you look around and you've become a caregiver for your parent without knowing it.
Yeah.
You have stepped into where you're not just like, being nice, like, oh yeah, I'll come help you, around the house, or, oh yeah, I'll pick up that for you. All of a sudden you're like, I'm going over there every day to make sure that they have dinner. They can't do this for themselves. So now I'm doing it. Or, I've noticed that they're not taking as good of care of themselves as they used to be, personal hygiene. So I'm going to step in. And then you're like, wait, when did this happen? That's what happens a lot for children of aging parents.
Absolutely. And that's the importance of setting those boundaries. And that's a super challenge for so many different people. What can we do to actually fix that? I mean, for me, we've talked before we started recording about dinners and documents, the first Monday of every night, or of every month, rather. My mom comes over, she brings her bills, the really important things, and we go through everything at once, as long as it's something that could wait. So dinner and documents, first Monday every single month. That's how I figured out a way that we could set boundaries. But There's got to be a lot of other tips that you're helping people with. What can people do to learn from this?
So I think, like what you said is very helpful. So your mother, this is the perfect time to do this. When your parents are still on their own, they're living in their, whether it's their independent living community, 55 plus, it's super cool, or they're living in the house that you grew up in, right? Before they get to where everything's falling apart, start incorporating ways to get involved with how they're taking care of themselves. Whether it is like, let's have dinner once a month, I'll come to you, you come to me, we'll talk about, what's going on with the family in general, and then we'll dive into a little bit of this. That is a perfect thing to do. And I think it's really important to do it on the front end, because a lot of times what happens, which is what happened to me, I was like in the middle of it going, why am I even doing any of this? Like, I have no expertise. I didn't know what I was doing. You probably have a little bit more, financial experience than I did, so like, it was like, I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't know what all these bills mean. And so I think coming in on the get-go, on the beginning, then as your parent maybe starts not being able to do those things, you're already in the mix. You're already aware of what's going on, and the handoff isn't so traumatizing for them or overwhelming for you.
Yeah. There was an old Volkswagen commercial decades ago, and I don't know why I remember it, but it was a 30-year-old guy sitting at the table with his young kid, and the kid drops some food on the floor, and he says, "Don't eat that." And then the overlay of the audio is, "I say don't eat that, but I'm really thinking 5-second rule. It's still good." and that's a parallel that I think is really relevant. We find ourselves doing all these things where we're pretending to be an adult, where a lot of people just have no experience. They feel out of place. They say one thing and they're doing something else. And as a result, you feel really guilty sometimes. Right. I should know this. I don't know this. Why don't I know this? I want to help you more. And struggling with feelings of guilt is something that's, quite frankly, pretty apparent. Why is this guilt so common, and what can you do to overcome that feeling?
So I recently had this epiphany about guilt, because guilt, I wore it not like a badge of honor, but just, it was like a shroud around me. Like, I just carried guilt about so many things, and we don't have time on this podcast to dive into all of that. But one of the things that I think is kind of universal for everybody, no matter what your relationship with your parents are like, or how dysfunctional your family was growing up, I don't know. But no matter where you are on that spectrum of, perfect family to I lived in a horrible situation, we all want to do we have all been told to do what our parents tell us. Mm-hmm. We've all been told they're going to tell us what to do. We do it. We are raised to be obedient children. And then at some point in your caregiving journey, in your adult child of a parent who needs your help, that we still are like, well, I'm just here to facilitate what my parents want. Whatever they say, I'm going to do to help them out. Well, first of all, sometimes they're asking us to do things we're not equipped to do, like you said, mm-hmm. right? So we feel guilt for not knowing how to administer medicine when we weren't ever trained to do that in the first place. Or we feel guilty about not understanding all the things in the medical system or all the things in the financial world or legal world. And it doesn't even occur to us because we're not thinking, oh, this isn't my expertise, I should reach out. We're just thinking, my parent has asked me to do this, I need to do it. So I think that's one of the places where we get stuck with the guilt is I'm supposed to do what my parents tell me. They're telling me to do something. I don't know how to do it. I don't feel equipped to do it. And sometimes we have imposter syndrome, like we can do a lot of things we think we can't. But a lot of times it's like, yeah. And that's why it's important to find resources in your community or online that help you make those decisions. I think another thing where the guilt pops up is when the relationship switches somewhat. Mm-hmm. So instead of your parents telling you what to do and being obedient to them, you may have to tell them no because what they're asking you to do is not appropriate.
Such a difficult conversation to have when that happens.
Like, no, you can't keep living on your own because it's unsafe. So I'm not going to keep facilitating this.
Give me the keys to your car. Yeah.
Right.
What are some of the simple, practical self-care practices that caregivers can start implementing easily just to get on that roadmap of making things a little easier for themselves?
Yeah, so a couple of things I tell caregivers just from the get-go is number one, the first thing you want to do when thinking about like, I need to take better care of myself is stop telling yourself that you're not doing anything. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we're like, I don't have time to do anything. I'm not doing anything. Well, chances are you're probably sleeping. That's a self-care activity. You're probably brushing your teeth, maybe not as often as you want, but it's happening. And you're probably showering and you're probably eating. Those are all things that we are doing to take care of ourselves every day. And so I advocate that the first thing a caregiver does is start paying attention to what they're already actually doing and acknowledging that. Oh yeah, I'm doing this. Look at this. Look at me. Brushing my teeth. And then this is every time I share this trick, I have on a podcast, I say this. This is a really dumb trick. I know that it sounds really stupid, but everybody I've shared it with has tried it and come back to me and says it works. So I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to tell you. Now, for women, everybody brushes their teeth, but this, I don't know if men would want to do this too, but I do. This is what I do. This is what I tell my fellow caregivers to do. Everybody brushes their teeth. They can do this. You brush in your teeth. Normally when you brush your teeth, Adam, what do you do when you brush your teeth? Are you usually like listening to a podcast or anything like while you're like getting ready in the morning?
In the morning, we typically have something on the radio in the background. Gina's walking around the house doing her thing. So, yeah.
Right. There's
Someone's
lots
making
going
coffee
on.
while the other person's brushing their teeth, typically, yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's you're multitasking, right?
There's something. There's things.
Yeah. So what I say is, okay, brushing your teeth may be one of only 3 things that you're going to be able to do for yourself all day today. So that 2 minutes when your quip is buzzing to switch from side to side, that is your 2 minutes. And I want you to turn off the podcast or turn off the radio. I want you to not let anybody in and out, whatever. Like, well, I mean, if you have one bathroom, people have to get in there, that's fine. But you know what I mean? Like, try to minimize the distraction and focus on the fact that you are taking care of yourself for that 2 minutes. That's your 2 minutes. I did this. And I really was like, this is my 2 minutes, dang it. This is my 2 minutes. And I was like, oh, I'm, this 2 minutes is over already? Dang, I think I might floss now because I want to extend this 2 minutes to like another minute. And then, the next thing I know, I have like the best teeth ever because I'm taking that time and I'm kind of expanding what I already have. And so that's a really fun, like little example, but that's what you do with mealtime. A lot of times when we're eating our meals, we're doing it in the car while we're fixing meals for the person we're caring for, our children or whatever. We're multitasking, we're walking around at least for one meal a day. I mean, I know it's not practical to do it for all 3, but for one meal a day, let that meal be all you're doing. Mm-hmm. You're not talking to somebody on the phone. You're not standing up. All of these kind of things, you're really just focusing on that. These are simple things that we can do to start feeling like paying attention to like, this is for me. This is to help me. This isn't just a habit. This is becoming a ritual for me. Habits and routines are designed to make us not think about things. Rituals are designed to pull us in to actually be mindful in the moment. And that's what we need more of as caregivers.
You may have actually hit on something without even realizing it. The unintended consequence of your action is actually beneficial. Now, there's a very senior ranking member of the military, I think he's an admiral or something, that gave a commencement speech at one point in time and said, every single morning, start by making your bed. Not because it's hard, not because it's difficult, but because it sets you on the right path. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit. And having that simple moment of I started my day off with routine and success then positions yourself for more successes down the road throughout the rest of the day. I did something easy and moving on. I wonder if you taking that moment when you're brushing your teeth to find that zen, to find that moment of peace is just a routine that sets you up for, hey, I did that little thing. Everything else throughout the day is just a little bit easier. And whether it's brushing your teeth or making your bed or not checking your cell phone the first thing when you wake up in the morning, all of those things can help you reclaim that time that you have.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, so I will tell you that brushing my teeth is part of my routine, but there is a ritual within my teeth brushing time. So I really so like routine is routine is what we do when we brush our teeth and we're also taking the trash out at the same time or what other random thing. Like we habit stack and they're like, every time I brush my teeth, I'm also going to wipe down the mirror or whatever. That's a routine. That's a habit stack. What I'm asking people to do is do the opposite. I'm asking you, like, yes, toothbrushing is part of your routine. You get up, you work out, you take a shower, you brush your teeth, right? Whatever. Mm-hmm. That's part of that routine. That's the routine. The ritual comes into like, okay, now I'm here brushing my teeth. I'm not going to think about the next thing on my routine. I'm going to focus right here. This ritual of brushing my teeth. I'm going to pay attention to the toothpaste I'm using. I'm going to pay attention to anything else I do as part of teeth brushing, flossing, gargling, whatever, that I'm going to pay attention to that. That becomes the ritual. And that will really help you with that time. And I do want to say something else about that taking the time. Is a lot of times as caregivers, we're just like, I just need, I need to find the time or I need someone to step in and give me the time. Well, I'm just going to tell you right now, that is not going to happen. Time is not going to randomly plop in your lap. No one is coming to relieve you of any of your duties, even though they always ask how they can help. They're not going to come. You have to take your time back. You have to. And doing it in this easy way where you're not really affecting anybody. Because like a lot of people are like, oh, I can't say no. I can't. Well, yeah, we'll get there. But take your time back in your mind. Like instead of being multitasking and thinking about all the things all the time, take that time back while you're eating your meal, while you're brushing your teeth, while you're in the shower, while you're walking your dog, whatever it is, that is your time. Own that time and don't let anything else get in your brain that you don't want in there thinking about all the other things. Focus on that. That mindfulness is really the key. And then once you feel like, oh, I can take back time that way, then we can talk about how to set more boundaries everywhere else. But that's the first step, honestly, really.
I think that's brilliant. I mean, the fact that you can have those lingering thoughts, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this, and it's always there, that's not helpful. But if you can say, I'm going to bucket, that's the time for it. When I'm not doing it, I'm not focused on it, and really just focusing on the moment and being present, I think that is tremendously impactful. While you're doing that, you oftentimes have those outside influences, and those outside influences can steer you back towards oh no, I'm thinking about this again. And one of the major outside influences that people have are difficult family dynamics.
Yep.
How can caregivers navigate challenges while still taking care of themselves when their family is constantly, that bird on their shoulder that's popping in?
Yes. So there's a lot of caveats here because I am not advocating for anybody to ignore their family member, especially the one that they are caring for, or put them in a situation that is unsafe. However, a lot of times, especially in caregiving and family situations that have some sort of codependency or lack of boundaries in any way, a lot of things, and this happened to me and I have heard it from countless caregivers as well, a lot of things that we take on as task of a caregiver are really like, no, they're just asking for something they want. This has nothing to do with their actual care. Okay. And while, yes, it is nice to have your loved one's favorite beverage for them, especially if they're living with you and they like a certain soda or tea. Yes. But you know what? If you run out, you don't have to stop what you're doing right then and go run and get it. Again, like you just said, bucket, you have a grocery list, add it to the list. You'll get more when you go to the grocery store. a lot of us are running around in this reactionary mode all the time, putting out these little fires that really don't have anything to do with caregiving, but are just like, oh, my parent is annoyed, or my parent is frustrated, or my parent is sad, so I have to go fix it. No, we don't. We can be compassionate and caring without being in this hyper vigilant, I've got to fix everything right now mode. That goes back to that obedience. You're not gonna be obedient to your parent after they count to 3. You better be obedient before they have to start counting. Well, now we can say, I want to help my loved one. I want to care for them and make sure they're safe, but I don't have to do everything they ask me to do, especially when it's not directly related to their care and it's inconvenient and pulls me away from other responsibilities I have, including taking care of myself and my family and working and all the other things.
Do you typically advise people to in the moment say, no, I'm not doing this right now when there is an ask or a request? Or is it I'm going to bucket everything and then we're going to address this later? Because that immediacy is so challenging.
So here's what I did. And of course, it depends on there's so many things. So I want people to say, if you want to reach out to me and let me walk you through your personal situation, I will. But in my case, so one of my things that I noticed is that everything my mom asked me to do, my default was yes. Every single thing. Whether it was, I need to go to the emergency room, that's an absolute yes, right? To, I need more pickles, okay? Everything was like, yes, I'll take care of that right now. Yes. I had no other default but yes. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things I started to do is said, well, what if my default was no or not now? And then if I could yes it right away, I would. So that's what I started to do. So when my mom would call, now, obviously, if she calls to go to the ER, the answer is yes. Okay. But when we're calling about some of these other things, instead of my default being yes, it would be, okay, let me check my schedule and I'll get back to you. Now, sometimes that was like 5 minutes later, I would say, oh, great, I have some time. I can go do that for you today. Or it looks like tomorrow is going to be a better day for me to do that. So here's what you can expect. I think you don't need to explain. You don't need to go into a lot of detail. Just this, let me get back to you, check on it, get back to them. Obviously, emergencies notwithstanding. That was a big game changer for me because it allowed me enough space to take a breath, think about how I was feeling physically and emotionally, think about, what my children might need, what my husband might need, what my pet might need, if I had anything. And because what I would do before is I would say yes and then squeeze in everything else around that errand or that, I got to go by Granny's house and do the light bulb or whatever, and now I was able to take a minute, see if it was possible. So it wasn't an automatic no. It was just giving me a little breathing room.
Did your mom notice that shift was happening?
A little bit. And so there was a little bit of like, it'll only take 3 minutes, da-da-da-da-da. And I would and I had to practice this. It was not perfect at first, just to be clear. But I did just practice repeating the same thing. Let me check my schedule and I'll call you back in a few minutes. Let me check my schedule and I'll let you know when I can do this. Let me check my schedule. And if I can't do that, then you'll have to call somebody else.
But Jeanette, you always have your phone with you. Why can't you just check your schedule right now?
Right. I'm driving, I'll check it when I can. That's where you like want to get in a back and forth with your parent. Cause then they're going to say, but la, la, la. If you're in the car and you're driving, can't you just drive by and get the pick? I mean, like it's just going back to that original sentence and not having to explain why. Like our parents have said, it's because I said so. Mm-hmm. Because I said so.
One of the things that drives me nuts, and if my mom listens to this, I'm sorry, I've said this to you before, so it's nothing that you're going to hear new. But when I go over to her house to do one thing, or I go over just to hang out with her for a little bit, there's always that inevitable, can you do this and this and this and this? And it's almost to the point where at times, not always, when I go over to her house, I don't want to go because I know it's not just going to be hey, I'm hanging out with you, I'm catching up with you. It's a list of the honey-do list that's there.
Yes.
And it drives me nuts. If I go over, that's fine, but please don't asked me to come over and see you. And then I walk in the door and you're like, oh, I need you to bring the laundry basket upstairs. I need you to do this. This light needs to be changed. And while I'm happy to do all of those things, it almost feels like there's a bait and switch. And now there's a cat and mouse game with my mom and me going, what am I really coming over to your house for right now?
And that's a conversation that it needs to have. I'm working on a book about this whole experience. And there's like a whole chapter on the one more thing. Like one more thing, because I had a lot of guilt around that. Because at first I was like, God, one more thing. Gosh, like, why is there always one more thing? And then I was like, how dare you think that? One day there's not going to be any more things because she's going to be gone. And then how will you feel? And like, I had this whole like, But then I realized I could either keep getting frustrated and then feel guilty about being frustrated and have this cycle going on in my mind, all the time, or I could address this issue. And so instead of saying like, Mom, like, stop with the one more thing, what I said was, it stresses me out when I don't know what I'm going to do when I'm here. I'm happy to come and help, but let's set up some type of where you can send me a message that tells me what you're going to need. And then those are the things I'm going to be able to address this time. And then if I have more time, I will say, is there anything else? And if you have anything else that you think of later, write it down on the piece of, we have a place, she writes it down. But another thing that you mentioned, Adam, I think is really important too, is like, so now my mom's in a nursing home now. So now what I do is during the week when I go, I'm handling issues. What's going on? Who do I need to talk to? What do I need to get done? On Saturdays when I go, we're not talking about any of that.
Yep,
that's just our time.
I love
and
that.
I think setting that expectation with her ahead of time and being like, on Saturday, there's no one here for me to even talk to. The admins are not here. So any problem you have with the food is not going to be addressed on a Saturday. I can deal with that when I come during the week. Now we're just going to tell stories, do crafts, whatever it is. I think it's a conversation. Yep.
Agree. We have a card game at Buried in Work called One More Story, where it helps people exchange and capture the memories from loved ones, friends. People actually take them on dates, which I've said on other podcasts. And I think is great and crazy at the same point in time. Maybe there's a connection with one more thing. And I just did a search. The domain is available for $12.5 million.
Let's go.
We can quickly just plunk some money down and get onemorething.com for you.
Yeah, I mean, that is a huge thing. And I think it's all about expectations. So if the expectation is you're coming over to visit, then you can say, hey, Mom, I just really need to visit right now. I have to leave at 8 p.m., but at like 7:45, if you need me to change a light bulb or anything, I'll get that done before I leave. But, let's just focus on the time that we have. Similarly to what you do with the dinner and documents, right? This reverse expectation. And of course, as your parents, as you start setting boundaries with your parents that you've never had before, they're going to not understand what you're doing. So you just have to, this is another thing I tell people all the time. You cannot, it's not your mom's job. It's not your parents' job to respect your boundary. I mean, it'd be nice, but it's not their job. It's your job. It's your job to say, I'm leaving at 8 p.m. At 7:45, any odds and ends you need me to do, I'll do those real quick before I leave. And then that's it. That's it. At 8 p.m., I'm leaving. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or whatever whatever it happens to be. Or I hear you. This visit, I'm just going to do all those things you need. I'll come back in a couple days. We'll just visit. Okay. Cause I really want to visit with you. And I can't, it's hard for me to do that when I'm also running around with the laundry basket and the light bulbs.
I think that's great advice. You've done a lot of interviews. This is what you've made your life mission, which is noble and helpful and impactful. There's likely a few questions or a topic or two that people just don't ask or talk about enough. Here's your opportunity. What do people know that, quite frankly, is just off the radar or you think we should focus on a little bit more?
Well, I told you this before we hit record, but whenever someone talks to me about my caregiving journey and how long I've been doing it and all of these things, and they're like, oh, I can't imagine. It must be so hard, which yes, it is, all those things. I'm like, hey, one thing that made it less hard for me is that my mother, for all the rigmarole, the ups and downs that we've gone through in our relationship and in her health journey, one thing that she did was get her stuff in order with an estate planner, with a lawyer, an elder care attorney. We got all that stuff done so that when this time came where she had to move in a nursing home and I had to sell her house and all this kind of stuff, we weren't freaked out about what assets that she might lose or, need to, there was none of that. And I think there is so much that you cannot control in caregiving. You are not going to be able to figure it out ahead of time. It's just going to come at you. But the one thing that you can control, not the one thing, there are a few things you can control. Your time is one of them. Another thing you can control is knowing what the plan is. And if your parent doesn't have a plan, helping them get one. And that can be, while you can't make anybody do anything they're not going to want to do. Your parent can be insistent that they don't need a will, they don't need a whatever, they don't want you power of attorney, blah, blah, blah. You can try to educate them on why that might not be what they think they want. But after that, if they don't want it, they don't want it. But you can try to educate them. And what I love about your website, the Buried in Work website, is that it walks you through the things that you need to tell your loved one. And it's so important. I really lucked out. I mentioned earlier that I was a fitness instructor back in the day. And I had one of my very faithful Pilates clients was an elder care attorney. And one year at Christmas time, and my mom was going through it, we were dealing with all this stuff. And he knew, because I would share some of that during our times together. And he said, why don't you bring your mom over to the office and we'll get some documents in order for you. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. Thanks. And we did. But what I didn't realize at the time is he set me up with the entirety of every document I have needed over the past 10 years.
Amazing.
We did this in 2014. Every time someone has asked me if I have a medical surrogate, if I have a power of attorney, if I have a personal care contract, if I have whatever, I have it. It's all in a file. I have it. When I needed to ask them questions in 2023, I called them. They had all my stuff. I went in for 30 minutes. They got everything updated. It was easy peasy lemon squeezy. It was the best, probably most valuable gift I've ever gotten. So that's my number one thing. Don't be afraid to ask the question. You're already uncomfortable. You already don't like to have the conversation. It's just a different kind of uncomfortable. Yeah. And then it'll be over and you'll have the stuff you need.
It cannot agree with you more. The number one thing people need to do, and this is what we talk about often on the podcast, is what the website is about, is organizing your information. A lot of people think that having a will or having a trust is estate planning, and there is so much more. Who needs to be called? What do you want to have happen in your funeral if you want to have a funeral? How do you want your advance directives written? Who needs to advocate on your behalf? Who gets power of attorneys? There are so many different things, and that's what our estate preparation package does. It doesn't make the will for you, it doesn't make the trust for you, but it helps you get everything in order. So if you have any questions or something happens to you, your family members don't have to go on that scavenger hunt.
Yeah, and it's a big, huge rigmarole if you don't have it.
It takes 570 hours on average to administer an estate, and that's offensive. All right, Jeanette, if people want to find you, how do they find you?
So normally I would tell you to go to my website, but it's in the middle of being migrated to a new thing. So please just find me on Instagram at the Self Caregiver. I'm also on LinkedIn, Jeanette Yates. I'm everywhere, really. I'm on all the socials, but Instagram's where you're going to find me the most, where I talk most about my caregiving journey and how I set boundaries, take care of myself, and live a life outside of caregiving that I actually enjoy. So those are the things I do. And again, the Self Caregiver on Instagram is the best place to find me as of the recording of this episode. Hopefully by the time it launches, though, theselfcaregiver.com will be back out.
It'll be back up. We'll put it in the show notes. And for those of you that are searching, that's JeanetteYates. That wraps up another episode of the Buried in Work podcast, where we feature tips and stories from industry professionals who specialize in making estate planning, end-of-life tasks, and estate transitions more manageable. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider leaving a review. As always, follow us on social media. Buried in Work are the hashtags and our accounts, or come to the website buriedinwork.com. And don't forget, if you're a podcast listener, you can save 10% off our estate preparation package and our games, like we talked about, One More Story, Nothing Left Unsaid, with the code BIW podcast. Jeanette, thank you again for being with us and for all of the important work that you're doing in supporting yourself and for supporting caregivers.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Buried in Work podcast. Remember, you can save 10% on our estate preparation package and games with code podcast10 at buriedinwork.com.